The Titan explorer cut through the dense haze of methane clouds, its exterior sheathed in ice from the sub-zero temperatures. Inside the craft, the crew of the Daedalus 4 sat strapped into their harnesses, their faces illuminated by the dim green glow of their console screens. The descent was turbulent, each gust of alien wind threatening to knock the ship off course. Captain Lila Marquez's voice, calm but firm, carried over the comms. Stabilizers holding. Prepare for touchdown in 3, 2, 1. A heavy jolt signaled their arrival. The groan of metal against the frozen ground echoed inside the cabin. Silence fell except for the steady hum of the ship's systems. Everyone exchanged nervous glances. They had trained for years for this moment, but now that they were here, the weight of the unknown pressed against them. "Touchdown confirmed," Marquez said, unbuckling her harness. "Welcome to Titan." The crew began their routine checks. Dr. Kieran Iyengar, the expedition's xenobiologist, muttered to himself as he scanned his instruments. His sharp features twitched with excitement and unease. Beside him, geologist Samuel Ortega examined the first atmospheric samples. "This place is a death trap," Ortega muttered, shaking his head. "Methane rain, cryovolcanoes, ground that shifts like a living thing. It's a miracle we landed in one piece." "Death trap or not, it's home for the next few weeks," said Marquez, her tone brooking no argument. "Let's get moving. Suits on." The crew donned their heavy exosuits, the hiss of pressurized seals filling the cabin. One by one, they stepped into the airlock, the final barrier between them and the alien world. Marquez was the last to enter. The inner hatch closed behind her with a sharp hiss, and the outer door slid open, revealing Titan in all its eerie glory. The first impression was of a twilight that never ended. The orange-tinged light of Saturn's reflection bathed the landscape, casting long, distorted shadows. Towering ice formations jutted from the ground like crystalline obelisks, their edges razor-sharp. In the distance, a river of liquid methane wound through a barren valley, its surface shimmering under the faint light. The air was heavy with a strange silence, broken only by the crunch of boots against frozen ground. "Spread out," Marquez ordered. "Stay within comms range. Let's make this count." The team moved cautiously, their every step measured. Ortega set up his instruments to analyze the ice, while Iyengar inspected a cluster of oddly shaped rocks that seemed too symmetrical to be natural. Engineer Nadia Petrov dragged a heavy case of equipment toward a nearby ridge, her movements deliberate. It was Petrov who found the ruins. "Captain, you're going to want to see this," her voice crackled over the comms. Marquez hurried to her position, and what she saw made her breath catch. Rising from the ice was a structure. No, a series of structures, dark and foreboding, their forms unlike anything made by human hands. They were massive and angular, with sharp edges that seemed to cut through the dim light. Strange carvings adorned their surfaces, symbols that pulsed faintly, as though alive. "Are those buildings?" Ortega asked, joining them. "They look ancient." "Older than ancient," Iyengar murmured, brushing his gloved fingers across one of the symbols. "And they weren't built by any human hands." "Do you think they're abandoned?" Petrov asked. "Abandoned or worse," Ortega said grimly. Marquez ignored the exchange, stepping closer to the ruins. Her heart pounded in her chest. She'd read reports of strange monoliths found on Europa and Ganymede, but nothing like this. This wasn't just alien architecture, it was alien intent, preserved in the ice for God knew how long. As the team set to work documenting the discovery, a faint sound drifted through the air. At first, it was so soft that Marquez thought she was imagining it. A low, keening wail, rising and falling like a distant siren. She froze, tilting her head to listen. "Do you hear that?" she asked. "Hear what?" Iyengar replied, focused on his work. "That sound, it's like crying," Marquez said. She looked around, but the landscape was still and lifeless. "It's the wind," Ortega said dismissively. "This place is full of tricks." Marquez wasn't so sure. The sound persisted, faint but insistent, carrying with it a haunting quality that made the hairs on her neck stand on end. The ruins loomed larger as the crew ventured deeper into their labyrinthine depths. What appeared to be simple structures from the surface revealed themselves as the tops of an intricate network buried under layers of methane ice. With every step, the team's boots crunched against brittle ground, the sound echoing unnaturally in the frozen corridors. Captain Marquez led the way, her flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive orange haze. "Petrov, any luck with mapping this place?" Marquez asked, her voice crackling over the comms. "I'm working on it," the engineer replied, her tone clipped. "But the signal's erratic. Something here is interfering with our scanners." "More of these damned carvings," Ortega muttered, crouching by a wall. His gloved fingers traced the alien symbols etched into the surface. They seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light, their patterns impossibly intricate. "They don't look decorative. This is functional, like a warning." "Don't touch anything," Marquez warned, her unease growing. "We're here to observe, not to—" "Captain, over here!" Iyengar's voice cut through the static, tinged with excitement. The xenobiologist was several meters ahead, standing at the edge of a massive chamber. Marquez hurried to his side, her stomach twisting at the sight before her. The room was vast, its ceiling disappearing into darkness. Rows of towering, organic-like structures filled the space, each one shaped like a twisted cocoon. They glistened under the faint light of their flashlights, their surfaces appearing almost fleshy. Inside each cocoon was a form, alien, grotesque and frozen in various stages of mutation. "They're not just remains," Iyengar said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They were alive when this happened." Marquez stepped closer, her breath fogging up the inside of her helmet. The creatures trapped inside the cocoons were unlike anything she'd imagined. Elongated limbs fused to their own torsos, faces distorted into agonized grimaces, their features stretched beyond recognition. The bodies were a patchwork of flesh and what looked like organic machinery. The two merged in ways that defied biology. "It's like they were changing," Petrov said, her voice quivering. "But into what?" Ortega stepped back, his flashlight shaking in his hands. "We shouldn't be here. Whatever did this isn't a graveyard. It's a warning." The faint, wailing sound from outside grew louder, resonating through the chamber. It was no longer distant but immediate, coming from all around them. Marquez turned sharply, her heart pounding. "That's not the wind," she said, her voice taut. "It's coming from the walls." Iyengar crouched by one of the cocoons, his scanner beeping frantically. "There's bioelectric activity here," he said. "These things, they're dead, but their neural signals, fragments of them, are still active. It's like their pain is encoded in the environment itself." "Encoded how?" Ortega demanded. "That doesn't even make sense." "It's not supposed to," Iyengar snapped. "But this entire structure, these carvings, the cocoons, it's all part of a system. Something was done to these beings, and whatever it wasn't natural." Marquez swallowed hard, forcing herself to focus. "We've seen enough. Grab the data and let's get out of here." Before they could move, Petrov let out a sharp gasp. The others turned to see her standing by a cylindrical device half buried in the ice, its surface covered in the same pulsating symbols. A faint, sickly green light emanated from its core. "It's some kind of machine," she said, her voice trembling. "It's still active." "Don't touch it," Marquez barked, but it was too late. Petrov's gloved hand had brushed against the surface. The light intensified, pulsing rapidly, and a deep, guttural hum reverberated through the chamber. The carvings on the walls began to glow in response, their patterns shifting like living things. The wailing grew louder, turning into a cacophony of tortured screams. The cocoons trembled, their grotesque contents shifting within. One cracked open with a wet, tearing sound, spilling out a black, viscous fluid that steamed against the frozen ground. "Run!" Marquez shouted, grabbing Iyengar by the arm. The team bolted, their footsteps pounding against the ice as the chamber came alive with movement. More cocoons split open, spilling their horrific contents, half-formed creatures that twitched and writhed as though trying to move. Behind them, the machine roared to life, emitting a blinding flash of green light. The walls of the ruins seemed to ripple, as if the structure itself was alive and reacting to their intrusion. The screams grew deafening, and Marquez felt her stomach churn at the unnatural pitch, a sound that seemed to penetrate her very bones. They burst out of the chamber and into the open air, collapsing onto the frozen ground. Marquez turned back, her chest heaving, to see the ruins pulsing with that sickly green light. The screaming had stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence that was almost worse. "What the hell just happened?" Ortega demanded, his face pale beneath his helmet. Marquez didn't answer. She couldn't. Her eyes were fixed on the ruins where something massive moved in the shadows, a shape too large, too wrong to be natural. "We've woken something up," Iyengar said, his voice hollow. "And it's not done with us yet." The air inside the Daedalus 4 was heavy with tension. The crew huddled in the command center, their faces pale and drawn in the dim green light of the monitors. Outside, the ruins loomed in the distance, pulsating faintly like the heartbeat of a slumbering beast. "We can't stay here," Ortega said, pacing back and forth. "That thing, whatever it is, it's not going to stop. We need to leave, now." "And go where?" Marquez shot back. Her voice was sharp, but her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the console. "We barely made it out alive. That machine isn't just some artifact, it's active, and it's spreading. If we leave without figuring out what we're dealing with, we'll be flying blind." "Captain, he's right," Iyengar said quietly. He leaned against the wall, his face slick with sweat. But not just about leaving. That machine wasn't just active, it did something to us. Marquez froze. What are you talking about? Iyengar held up his hand and the crew gasped. The skin beneath his glove was mottled with dark, branching veins that glowed faintly in the dim light. His fingers twitched unnaturally, curling inward as though controlled by an unseen force. It started after we got back, Iyengar said, his voice shaking. I thought it was just exhaustion or a stress reaction, but it's spreading. My body, it's changing. Petrov stepped forward, her own hands trembling. I've been feeling it too. My skin. She unzipped the collar of her suit, revealing patches of flesh that looked warped, almost fused with the material. It's like it's growing into me. A heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by the faint hum of the ship's systems. Marquez forced herself to remain calm, though her mind raced. The ruins, the cocoons, the machine. It was all connected, and now it was inside them. We don't have much time, Iyengar continued, his voice steadier now. Whatever was done to those beings in the ruins, it's happening to us. That machine, it's a trigger, a catalyst. It's rewriting us. Marquez clenched her fists. Then we destroy it. How? Ortega demanded, his voice rising. You saw what it did. It turned that place into a living nightmare. We're not equipped for this. Before anyone could respond, the ship lurched violently, throwing them to the floor. The lights flickered and a low, guttural roar reverberated through the hull. Marquez scrambled to her feet, gripping the console for support. It's outside, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Through the viewport, the ruins came alive. The pulsating light had intensified, spreading across the landscape like veins of green fire. From the depths of the ruins, a massive shape emerged, writhing and shifting as though it could not decide on a single form. The creature was a grotesque amalgamation of limbs, torsos, and faces, all fused together in a chaotic mass. Its movements were accompanied by a chorus of tortured screams, each one more harrowing than the last. "Seal the ship!" Marquez barked, snapping into action. "Lock everything down!" Petrov ran to the controls, her fingers flying across the console. The outer hatch sealed with a heavy thunk, but the sound offered little comfort. The creature moved with horrifying purpose, its shifting mass leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. It was heading straight for them. "We need to stop it," Iyengar said, clutching his chest. His veins pulsed visibly now, glowing brighter with each beat of his heart. "The machine, it's the source. If we overload it, we might be able to shut it down. And get us killed in the process," Ortega snapped. "We don't even know if that thing can be stopped." Marquez stepped forward, her jaw tight. "We don't have a choice. If we don't stop it here, it's only a matter of time before it spreads beyond Titan. Petrov, can you rig the ship's power core to overload the machine?" Petrov hesitated, her eyes wide with fear. I think so, but someone would have to go out there and connect it manually." "I'll do it," Iyengar said. His voice was steady now, a quiet resolve in his eyes. "I'm already compromised. If I can buy you time, it's worth it." "No," Marquez said firmly. "I'm the captain. It's my responsibility." Yengar shook his head. You need to lead them out of here. Get the others back to the orbital station. I'll handle this. Before Marquez could argue, the ship shuddered again. The creature was closer now, its grotesque form pressed against the viewport. Its many faces twisted in agony, their mouths open in silent screams. "Captain," Petrov said urgently, "we don't have time." Marquez looked at Iyengar, her heart heavy. She knew he was right. "Take this," she said, handing him a small transmitter. "If anything goes wrong—" "I know," Iyengar said, cutting her off. "Get them out of here." Without another word, he suited up and stepped into the airlock. Marquez watched him go, her throat tight. The door closed behind him with a final hollow clang, and she turned back to the others. "Prepare for takeoff," she said, her voice hard. "We'll give him as much cover as we can." Outside, Iyengar moved toward the ruins, his body racked with spasms as the infection spread. The creature turned its attention to him, its massive form lurching forward. As he approached the machine, he activated the transmitter, his final words echoing in Marquez's ears. "Tell them what happened here." The connection cut out and the ruins erupted in a blinding explosion of green light. Marquez shielded her eyes, her chest tight with a mixture of grief and determination. As the ship lifted off, the screams of the creature faded, replaced by a deafening silence. But the horror was far from over. The Daedalus 4 hung in Titan's darkened sky, its engines a low hum against the deafening silence below. Inside, Captain Marquez stood motionless by the viewport, her hands clenched into tight fists. The ruins were collapsing into themselves, green light radiating outward in irregular pulses. The creature, a mass of tortured flesh and alien horror, writhed amidst the chaos, its roars vibrating through the hull of the ship like the dying groans of a collapsing star. Iyengar was gone. His sacrifice had bought them a sliver of time, but not enough. "Status report," Marquez barked, breaking the heavy silence. Petrov glanced up from her station, her face pale and streaked with sweat. "The overload destabilized the ruins, but it didn't destroy the machine. The creature's still alive, if you can call that living." Marquez felt the weight of the crew's eyes on her. Ortega sat slumped in his seat, shaking his head. "It's over. We tried. We need to leave before it—" A deafening roar cut him off, shaking the ship violently. Through the viewport, the creature emerged from the ruins, its body now grotesquely enlarged, glowing with the same sickly green light as the machine. Faces, hundreds of them, screamed in unison from its writhing mass, their agony amplified into a psychic wave that clawed at the edges of Marquez's mind. "Captain," Ortega said, his voice trembling, "we can't fight that. We have to leave. If we don't, it'll follow us," Marquez snapped. "This thing isn't mindless. It's been waiting for centuries, and now it knows we're here. If it gets loose—" Her voice trailed off, the implications too horrifying to put into words. Petrov stared at her console, her hands trembling. "There might be another way," she said quietly. Marquez turned to her. "What do you mean?" Petrov hesitated, then took a shaky breath. "The ship's core. If we eject it and detonate it manually, it could trigger a chain reaction that collapses the ruins entirely. The machine, the creature, it would all be destroyed." Ortega's head shot up. You're talking about a total meltdown. That's enough power to kill us, Marquez finished, her voice cold and steady. It would destroy everything in a 5-kilometer radius, including this ship. A heavy silence fell over the room. Petrov looked down, her face a mask of guilt. I'm sorry, Captain, but it's the only option. If we don't stop it now, there won't be anything left of Titan or us. Marquez felt the weight of their stares again, the unspoken question hanging in the air. She closed her eyes, forcing herself to think. Iyengar's voice echoed in her mind. Tell them what happened here. We'll do it, she said finally, but we're not all going down with it. Petrov frowned. What are you saying? I'll stay behind and detonate the core manually, Marquez said, her tone leaving no room for argument. The rest of you will take the escape shuttle and return to the orbital station. Ortega shot to his feet. Absolutely not. You can't. This isn't a debate. Marquez's voice cracked like a whip. I'm the captain. This is my responsibility. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Petrov nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. I'll prep the core for ejection, she said softly. Ortega slumped back into his seat, shaking his head. You're a damn fool, Marquez. Maybe, she said, but I'm a fool who's going to finish what we started. The air in the ship felt heavier as the crew worked in grim silence. Petrov and Ortega moved with mechanical precision, their faces pale as they prepared the core for ejection. Marquez stood in the command center, watching the creature through the viewport. It had grown impossibly large, its mass twisting and expanding as though feeding off the energy of the ruins. The screams from its countless faces filled the air, a constant reminder of the stakes. Finally, Petrov's voice came over the comms. Core is ready. Shuttles prepped for launch. Marquez nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. Get to the shuttle, she said. That's an order. Petrov hesitated, then turned and hurried toward the airlock. Ortega lingered for a moment, his jaw clenched. You don't have to do this, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Yes, I do, Marquez replied. She forced a small smile. Get out of here, Sam. That's an order. Ortega hesitated, then gave a reluctant nod. Good luck, Captain. The shuttle launched moments later, its engines flaring as it ascended into the thick orange clouds. Marquez watched it go, her chest tight. She allowed herself a single deep breath before turning back to the console. All right, she muttered. Let's end this. She activated the core's ejection sequence, feeling the ship shudder as the massive reactor detached from its housing. The core tumbled toward the ruins, glowing brighter with each passing second. The creature turned its attention to the falling core, its many faces contorting in rage and fear. Marquez's hand hovered over the detonation button. Her voice trembled as she spoke into the ship's recorder. This is Captain Lila Marquez of the Daedalus 4. If you're hearing this, then we succeeded. Titan's ruins are no longer a threat. Tell Earth. Tell them to stay away. Some things aren't meant to be found. The creature lunged for the core just as Marquez pressed the button. A blinding flash consumed the ruins, the ship, and the creature in an instant. The sound was deafening, a cacophony of destruction that seemed to shake the very moon itself. From the safety of the orbital station, Petrov and Ortega watched as a massive explosion lit up Titan's surface. The green light was gone, replaced by a churning cloud of debris. Petrov wiped a tear from her cheek, her voice trembling. She did it. Ortega nodded silently, his expression unreadable. As the dust settled, the orange haze of Titan returned, eerily quiet. For the first time since they'd arrived, there were no screams. But deep in the shadows of the orbital station, Petrov noticed something on her hand. A faint glow beneath her skin. She froze, her breath hitching. The nightmare wasn't over.